Hi, welcome. In this video, it's part of my series called Flipping the Script. I want to focus in on this whole issue of a pitcher when it comes to response, when it comes to trainers who are superficially focused on appearances and who fail to even recognize what defines training once a relationship problem is already underway. And here, an example of a trainer who's advocating, he'll talk about not using treats, but then he talks about, again, the title of this video is how to use affection the right way by way of certain responses. And again, I'll talk about this whole thing about the motivator in terms of relationship itself, in terms of how you're currently perceived. I'm going to line this up in terms, again, I talk about the parenting example by way, again, of how even a selfish child, once a child becomes selfish, how they perceive the parents themselves, the parenting role. But again, this whole issue about the confusion dog training world, when trainers are looking at appearances in a very superficial way while assuming that those responses, the responses they're generating, can be trusted without even having a treat in your hand. And understand this is the thing about the issue about dogs as social animals, the issue about relationship. And again, the starting point. So here I'm going to play some of this video. Here you have a trainer, IQ dog training, and who is attempting to suggest that this picture that he's setting in motion can be trusted.
Without food, just using only affection. So I already tried spending time with Rusty and Beverly, and I noticed that they didn't want to play as much with the ball or the toys. They showed a little interest, but only for a few minutes.
So here's the thing too. So I talk about this whole thing about when dogs have gained a level of control in their relationship with their owners, everything becomes contaminated by way of control, which means that again you'll have dogs that are say highly motivated to want to chase a ball, certain types of interactions, which again, are get I say thrown off. Once they start to see you in terms of bringing control into certain interactions, what you'll see is that dogs will lose interest in certain activities where they did not have a right view of you and those items such as ball play in the first place. And so again, this is where one of the indicators where suddenly a dog will lose interest in certain things because they were in full control. And again, you'll see this through a dog, say bringing back, you're getting a dog to bring back, say, the ball for ball play, and they won't bring it back, or you'll end up having to chase them to get the ball because they're starting to trophy it. They're basically seeing you as basically toll booth in you, where they're kind of sticking a quarter in the toll booth, but it's not in right relationship. You're not in harmony with the dog that way. But again, if you bring a dog in, say a board and train situation, say a trainer, you'll see immediately the dogs start to really shut down, almost lose interest in certain things, even not eating their food. And this is where you get into this issue about, well, what's going on here? Why is it that dog suddenly is losing interest in certain things? Well, because it's like a child saying, well, that they pick up their baseball mitt and go home because things aren't going down their way. You understand? This is one of the indicators when it comes to a relationship problem. But here you have a trainer who's going the other way. Understand? He's saying that, well, how do I get the dog to show more interest in, say, ball play? Well, it's actually taking the wrong path here, okay, in terms of control. So understand emotion. It talks about affection, emotion, how this ties into motivation. But again, this understand that in terms of weakness, in terms of control, giving a dog comfort the wrong way. Okay, understand that it's really important about how you're perceived in the relationship, in terms of how everything is filters through and is defined that way.
So then I was trying to decide, well, what's the best way to train them? I know they like food. We used food the other times, but we don't.
So here's talk about using food as a motivator. Again, talk about you don't want to use food, okay? Because it's not about just superficial response that way. I understand that, but here's the problem. Extends just beyond food itself. Understand the relationship itself based on how you perceive becomes its own motivating agent. That's the depth of the issue here, or even the problem with trainers who fail to understand that, how you proceed within your role itself, can set in motion a bad picture of change. I understand it's no different when I talk about the parenting example, within the permissive parenting style. It's like the child who goes to a certain parent because they get what they want. They get their ice cream, they get what they want. And so within the context of, the permissive parenting style, it's like the parent says, "Oh, look, my child listens to me better." Well, no, actually, they're motivated to respond certain times, which may seem better, but it's not better in the sense of the child's actually become selfish. So this is the same thing here. Understand when dogs start to gravitate towards certain people, people will see it as love through, say, through this training. Here's talking about affection, but it's a bad attachment. Okay, it becomes possessiveness, and this is where people say, "Well, I don't understand when my dog, avoids, say, men. My dog is following me into the shower, is following me everywhere." This type of attachment, and people get very confused with that because, again, they see that as the dog loving them more. When in reality, the dog is attached because affection or emotion becomes the issue about control. It's perceived as weakness based on what that connection represents.
Don't want to always use food when we train them, and we want them to learn to listen without food. So another great way is to use affection.
So here, this trainer is trying to switch it out, right? He's saying, well, food not an option, but now switch to affection, which is a problem. Okay, you do not want to use the relationship that way, your role that way. Okay, in terms of based on that type of connection and what that connection represents in terms of control through that type of attachment.
I noticed that they love affection.
Sure, they do.
Dogs really appreciate affection, especially when their owners are working all day long and they don't see their owners all day long. So when their owners get home, they're starving for that affection. But we don't want to just give them affection whenever they want or when they demand it.
So same thing. He's trying to exploit, right, that type of connection. He's trying to say, well, I'll tie this in to elicit a response, while assuming that those responses can be trusted, that they are defined properly, which is totally wrong. You understand this, this is the same thing with, tying certain motivators in. Just be aware, even as a trainer. Some people say, well, I'll put I'll introduce or incorporate the dog's, say, food, into a certain situation or a certain series of responses, but I'll do it at the end. But what happens is, okay, the same thing, the dog's mind starts jumping where they're like, yeah, sure, I'll do A, B, C, and D to get a certain thing. And you're thinking those responses are great, but here's the problem is you're doing this within the parameters of a ongoing relationship problem. And so the dog has already gained control in the relationship. So everything you tie into it as a motivator to generate responses that way, okay, is going to lead you into assuming that, once again, that picture can be trusted. And see, this is where, again, talk about where everything needs to come to a hard stop through approaching training for what it represents by way of a intervention. Again, talk about the core ingredients, influence and control. They need to come in through a intentional interaction-based approach. Okay, that's going to follow the right path. Understand that this trainer is not doing that.
It, or when they ask for it, we want the affection to be on our terms. And so the affection is on my terms, which means I don't let the dog force me to give them affection or demand it or bark at me to get it. And I also don't want to give affection for no reason. But if I notice the dog doing something good, then I can give the dog affection in that exact moment.
The same thing. So, he's trying to tie in this whole thing about affection. This comes this whole thing about, positive reward, affection. But again, understand how nature, how dogs, okay, how that's interpreted in and through the relationship itself. Okay, control is a motivator, becomes a motivating agent through what affection, okay, represents to the dog that way. And understand this is a big issue, it's very deceiving because again, they put their emotions into that and they say, well, that attachment represents the dog loves me more, but again, this is a cautionary tale when it comes to appearances.
And so that's one great way to train dogs. So I'll show you some examples. For example, if I tell the dogs to come.
So here he's got the whole big loose leash thing here. I talked about this before in some videos, okay? Because understand that when, you're engaging a relationship problem, it needs to be the right conversation. Okay, right conversation means it needs to take the form of just like parental influence, okay? It needs to come online. It needs to take the form of a demand. Okay, it needs to be expressed through a demand, through how you're interacting with the dog. If you watch my videos, you'll see, how I'm doing, say, the come command at a certain point. And again, because again, what that does is once the perception of the dog change through, influence and control being reconciled that way, then commands start to come online. Okay, you'll see it through my board and train process after about day 12. You'll see that start to take hold the right way. Here, okay, this is like I talk about the themes of bribery, accommodation, and negotiation. Okay, here he's trying to elicit a response to his already sideways role, okay, just like the permissive parent, and using affection, okay, affection to the dog is a form of control based on what that connection represents to the dog that way. And so he's trying to use that as a motivator to elicit a response.
I can use affection. So I'll go farther away and I'll say, Beverly, come.
See, it's the same. So you'll see his posturing stuff here. It's that same type of, begging, bribery-based type of a posturing here.
Come. Good girl. Sit. Sit.
So his dog doesn't even want to sit. Okay, so here, this is where you have to bring into a form of a demand. Okay, it has to be expressed that way. Here, it's this type of
I
negotiation,
don't give any affection.
saying, okay, well, you don't get affection until you do this superficial sit. Okay, so once the dog does a superficial sit, okay, then okay, I'm gonna connect, okay, connection through emotion, okay, tying into the issue about control by way of the relationship.
But now I do. Good girl, because she listened. Good girl.
So he's saying, oh, she listened. But you have to understand, what does that even mean? Is it just about superficial response this way? And does this actually fix the dog's perceptions within the relationship itself the right way of the dog owner? Absolutely not.
So I give affection, and then I stop. Now I can move on to my next.
But see, he's moving here. If you watch my videos, this dog's just moving around again. Okay, it's just like, okay, what is this? Is so superficial. What is this even about?
Command.
Look at it.
Beverly. Let me try Rusty this time. Rusty.
Try trying Rusty because Beverly's just flopping out here.
Rusty, sit. Good boy.
Like this is really I don't know even how to even respond to this. So yeah, so this is trying to elicit, again, set up a certain picture.
Good boy. So I give him affection, and then I stop the affection. Rusty, sit. Good boy. So if I want him to stay longer, I'm gonna wait a little bit longer before giving him affection.
Well, the dog just laid down from the sit. So I understand this is just operating off of, again, the attempt to use emotion, right, as a motivator. But understand the problem here is the trainer's not perceived the right way to begin with. It's this is all about understanding the whole issue. When we talk about dogs, what makes dogs dogs in terms of nature, and talk about strength and weakness defined that way in terms at the social level, but how that comes together through a process. Understand that this isn't it. Okay, this is a attempt to generate some responses, but all they are responses, but without perceptions actually changing the right way. Because he's tying what he's doing here, he's tying in his role, which is already misaligned. Okay, it's like the permissive parent who thinks that they have, the child sees them the right way based on the fact that the child's merely going to them because they're getting what they want. But the real problem lies in the fact that the child's already selfish. Okay, understand that this isn't, the relationship's already sideways. And see, this is the same problem here. The relationship's already sideways. So the question is, well, what are you doing? Like, what is this actually supposed to, how is this bringing the relationship into alignment? It's not. So understand here, just because you don't use treats and you're either trying to use a different motivator. This can go into toys. This can align with food. This can align with the relationship itself. Okay, by way of how you're perceived with relationships. The dog's already gained control in the relationship. Control itself can be its own motivating agent within the relationship. Like, understand the depth of the problem here. So again, my encouragement, okay, for anyone looking for information, check out my website. There's so much confusion out there in the dog training world. You have trainers like this who, again, people will buy into it, right? Because if they're already, emotionally connected, they say, "Oh, this is great. I don't have to change how I think. I don't have to change how I interact. I can trust the pictures being set in motion." But here you can see just how discombobulated this is. The dogs aren't even, going, they're not maintaining anything, just floating around here, and really it's a mess. So check out my website. Lots of great information talking about what defines training, what defines a process. Thanks for watching.